You're with ABC News. It's 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time and 6 a.m. in the West. Leading our bulletin this hour, the US President announces he is postponing strikes on Iran's energy facilities for 5 days. Donald Trump says it follows productive talks with Tehran about ending the conflict. But Iran denies negotiations have taken place, claiming fake news is being used to manipulate oil markets. We'll cross live to Washington in just a moment, and we'll also have an update from the Middle East. Also ahead, we are live to Canberra, where Australia and the European Union are set to sign off on a long-awaited trade deal and security partnership. The EU President is preparing to address Federal Parliament, and our Foreign Affairs reporter will have all the details on that. 2 teenage boys have been killed after crashing their motorbike into a bus in Sydney. The 15-year-old rider and his 14-year-old passenger were travelling on a section of road reserved for buses and emergency vehicles. Tens of thousands of public school teachers in Victoria are going on strike for the first time in 13 years. We will cross live to our reporter in Melbourne as they march on State Parliament. Teachers in Tasmania are also walking off the job. And ex-tropical cyclone Narelle is forecast to re-intensify. We will take you through the areas likely to be impacted by that. That'll be coming up shortly. It's Tuesday, the 24th of March. I'm Gemma Veness from the land of the Darug people in Parramatta in Western Sydney. And this is ABC News Mornings. The US President has backed down from his threat to attack Iran's energy infrastructure, extending today's deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump claims productive talks have been held with Iran on a potential resolution, and says attacks on the country's energy infrastructure will be paused for 5 days, subject to the success of those negotiations.
Well, they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. That's number one. That's number 1, 2, and 3. They will never have a nuclear weapon.
They said yes to that?
They've agreed to that.
What about the Strait of Hormuz? Who's going to be in control of that?
That'll be opened very soon if this works.
How soon? And who's in control of it? Will Iran still be able to control the flow of oil?
Be jointly controlled.
By who?
Maybe me. Maybe me.
You want the United States to be in
me
control
and the Ayatollah, whoever the Ayatollah is, whoever the next Ayatollah.
But Iran's parliamentary speaker denies any talks have taken place. He says Iran demands complete and remorseful punishment of the aggressors and that, quote, all Iranian officials stand firmly behind their supreme leader and people until this goal is achieved. He goes on to say no negotiations have been held with the US and accuses the president of attempting to use fake news to manipulate financial and oil markets. Real or not, Trump's claims did manage to drive down oil prices and send Wall Street rallying. The S&P 500 experienced its best day since the war began, while Brent crude fell below $100 a barrel. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel will continue to strike Iran and Lebanon.
Earlier today, I spoke with our friend, President Trump. He believes there is a chance to leverage the significant achievements of the IDF and the United States military to realize the war objectives in an agreement that will safeguard our vital interests. At the same time, we continue to strike both in Iran and in Lebanon. We are crushing the missile program and the nuclear program and continue to severely damage Hezbollah. Just a few days ago, we eliminated 2 more nuclear scientists, and there's more to come.
An immediate end to hostilities in Lebanon is increasingly unlikely, with Israel escalating its campaign in the south. More than 1,000 people have been killed and more than 1 million displaced from southern Lebanon. Hardliners in the Israeli government are pushing for a permanent occupation of Lebanese territory.
The current campaign in Lebanon must end with a fundamental change in the situation, beyond the defeat of the terrorist organization Hezbollah. The Litani River must be our new border with Lebanon, just like the Yellow Line in Gaza and the barrier at Mount Hermon in Syria.
North America correspondent Cayman Gock is in Washington and joins us now. Cayman, Donald Trump has spoken. What's he had to say?
Well, he's given this very optimistic assessment of potential talks with Iran and the United States and hopes of a potential end to this war. He even suggested that Iran would be willing to give up any nuclear weapons plans. He believes that the devastation that the United States and Israel have caused in Iran, that this time, he says, they mean business, and he warned that they have one more chance at peace. He said that they had many agreements. In fact, he said there were 15 points of agreements, although what those 15 points are, he didn't say, apart from the one that Iran should forego their nuclear ambitions. But he did say that if a deal was made, that the United States would go into Iran and collect and take its enriched uranium, which he described as nuclear dust. He also claimed that the Strait of Hormuz would open very soon and that it would be potentially jointly controlled by the United States and Iran. And because these negotiations, he says, went so well, he is now delaying those American strikes on Iranian energy facilities by 5 days. And that's referencing an ultimatum he made a couple days ago, declaring if Iran did not reopen the strait, that he would obliterate their power plants. Now, who exactly Donald Trump is talking to, it's not clear. He says it's a very senior individual the United States is engaging with, but he did say that it was not the new supreme leader. Take a listen.
A top person, don't forget. We've wiped out the leadership phase 1, phase 2, and largely phase 3. But we're dealing with a man who I believe is the most respected and the leader. It's a little tough. We've wiped out everybody.
Is that the supreme leader?
No, not the supreme leader.
So it's not much trouble.
Well, nobody heard of the second supreme leader.
Cayman, how has Iran responded?
Well, Iranian officials have denied that any direct talks have even taken place. And we know that third parties, nations, have been engaging, passing on messages between the United States and Iran. But the Speaker of Iran's parliament came out and said Donald Trump's comments were fake news. They were aimed at manipulating the financial markets and the oil markets. And he went on to say that it was to escape the quagmire in which the United States and Israel are trapped in. On the note of the stock market, it did, in fact, rally following Donald Trump's comments. The S&P had its best day since the war. Oil prices dipped about 10%. So there are very conflicting messages coming from the United States and Iran on the extent of these talks that have possibly or taken place, depending on whose word you go by. But Donald Trump seemed to suggest that the Iranian regime needs a better communication department because he said that the talks did in fact happen.
Cayman, what do you think this says about President Trump's strategy with this war?
Well, the United States have outlined their military objectives, but Donald Trump is acutely aware that this strategy for the war needs to also take into account the fact that it is a midterm election and it could impact the remainder of his presidency and his legacy. Domestically, he came out and campaigned promising to not drag the United States in forever wars or foreign entanglements. Since this year, he deposed one leader in Venezuela. That proved to be relatively popular because there was no long-term engagement with the United States military. But now this war does threaten that. And he knows that the longer this drags on, the less popular it will be domestically, the more lives that will be lost, and that includes both civilians in Iran but also American soldiers possibly, and the economic hardship that will be felt around the world and will ripple not just in America but across the globe. And he is aware that they are major risks. So this delay in these strikes that he's declared, he is signalling to the world, he is making sure that he is giving himself more time and more options and possibly providing an off-ramp that could be done diplomatically. But also, Donald Trump sometimes signals with the intention to mislead a targeted audience. We know last year in June, the White House came out and said that they would give Iran 2 weeks before they decided whether or not to strike their nuclear facilities. Little did we know, Donald Trump had already made up his mind. He'd already signed off on B-2 bombers that were en route as the White House was saying that, and then they struck those nuclear facilities. So just because he says something doesn't necessarily mean it's true or that he will follow through. But whilst he did seem very positive and there was a different tone, the way he was declaring the progress made in these talks compared to that reference I made in June last year, We are also aware that there are US Marines en route to the Middle East as we speak.
North America correspondent Cayman Gok, thank you. The reported negotiations come as Iran's civilians continue to pay a heavy price, with sustained attacks on the capital, Tehran. Middle East correspondent Catherine Diss reports.
Talk of a deal or talks at all were quickly smacked down by Tehran. With both sides contradicting each other, it is difficult to know how or even if background negotiations are taking place. But Donald Trump's flip-flopping has done nothing to quell the fears of Iranians on the ground.
My son-in-law lives in here. Okay. We are looking for him, and we don't know if he's alive or not. Maybe he's dead, or I don't know where he is.
They're worried about what Donald Trump might do next. They have said that they're scared after hearing his threat of attacking power plants, which would make their already difficult lives intolerable. And they worry that hitting power infrastructure will mean no water, no gas, no electricity to live their lives. They're concerned about how they'll feed their children and if Donald Trump will leave their country in ruins. Now, his back down is likely to be a point of contention with his partner in this war, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Divisions have already started to emerge over their strategies and how this war should be waged. So this very public proclamation that America and Iran are close to reaching a deal is likely to anger the Israeli leader, who wants to maintain pressure on Tehran, not de-escalate.
Australia and the European Union look set to finally sign a long-awaited free trade pact as the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen prepares to address federal parliament. Australia and Europe are also expected to sign a new security partnership, as well as an agreement on research and development. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetz joins us now. Stephen, what are the main elements of this free trade deal?
Well, Gemma, a lot of this has been heavily speculated on for some time. And of course, this comes after protracted negotiations spanning around 8 years. So this has been a long time coming. Look, the main consequence of this is just that we're going to see tariffs slashed on a whole lot of products in both directions. And that means, in the broad, that we're going to see cheaper European goods for Australian consumers and vice versa. It is also going to open up what is a very big market of some 450 million consumers to Australian exporters. And on top of that, it's also the last jigsaw, or piece of the jigsaw puzzle, if you like, in Australia's free trade architecture. Most of Australia's free trade partnerships or major trading relationships already have an FTA underneath them. And this is, in a way, if you exclude Taiwan anyway, the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle, the last big trading partner where an FTA doesn't exist. So the fact that the government is very widely expected to land this deal today is significant.
Tell us, what have been some of the main sticking points and how have they been resolved?
Yeah, some of these go back a long way. The most obvious one goes to the access that Australian farmers have to the European market. Now, this, of course, is really sensitive for the Europeans because European farmers feel already under a lot of strain. They're very heavily subsidised. They're already wary about foreign competition, and Australia, which is a major exporter, and its attempts to bang down the door have been very politically contentious. Now, when these talks last collapsed back in 2023, that was over access for Australian meat, in particular access for tariff-free quotas for Australian red meat. Don Farrell, the Trade Minister, walked away at the time. He said the offer simply wasn't good enough. Now, we don't know what the final figure is going to be when it comes to red meat in the deal that everyone expects to be unveiled today. It sounds like it's going to be pretty close, though, to the figure that Don Farrell originally walked away from. So the suggestion is that Australia has only got a modest improvement, perhaps, from what it got back in 2023. And that it has agreed to compromise, at least in part. Although it is important to recognise that it is going to see far more Australian beef flow over to Europe than is the case at the moment, even if it's, well short of the 50,000 or so tonnes that Australian farmers have been pushing hard for. There's no doubt there'll be some disappointment in the sector over that. Australia, I imagine, will argue that it was the best they could do and they had to secure this in the interests of compromise. When it comes to another issue, though, I think Australia's likely to end up largely on top, but that's over the so-called geographic indicators that allow Australian producers to send things labelled like, Parmesan, Feta, Prosecco overseas. That's something that European producers don't want to see. They believe they have effectively got that domain to themselves. Now, it sounds like, again, a compromise has been struck that will allow most Australian producers to keep on using those labels, but the exact contours of this are not clear. We'll have to wait and see exactly what's unveiled in a couple of hours. And
what are some of these other agreements and what is their significance?
Yeah, we'll also see agreements in a range of other areas. At the top of that list is a security relationship or a security partnership that is going to be signed by both sides. The EU has already signed agreements like this with a number of countries, including India, South Korea, Japan, Canada. It's not anything like a formal military alliance. Neither side is making military commitments to one another. But it will see closer military cooperation, more dialogue between the two sides, and potentially open the door to Australia doing more joint defence procurement, sometimes subsidised by EU taxpayers, at a time when Australia is looking for sources of advanced defence technology. So, that's pretty significant. On top of that, we'll also see agreements in research and a range of other areas. All in all, it looks like a pretty substantive agenda for the day, and it'll also be interesting to see what Ursula von der Leyen has to say when she addresses federal parliament in just a couple of hours' time. Interestingly, Gemma, 20 foreign leaders have been invited to address Australia's parliament over the years. Ursula von der Leyen is the first woman to be handed that honour. So a small moment in history here in Canberra coming up in just a few hours.
Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts, thank you. 2 teenage boys have died after the motorbike they were riding collided with a bus in Sydney's west last night. The boys were riding on a section of road reserved for buses and emergency vehicles. Our reporter Max Tillman joins us now from Sydney. Max, what can you tell us?
Good morning. Well, emergency services were first called to this stretch of the Liverpool-Parramatta Transitway in Bosley Park at about 7:10 p.m. last night, following reports of a collision between a trail bike and a commuter bus. Upon arriving at the scene, they found a 15-year-old boy who we understand was riding the bike at the time, and his 14-year-old male passenger effectively trapped under that bus. Despite the best efforts of New South Wales paramedics who were at the scene, both of those boys tragically died at the scene. We understand that the 48-year-old bus driver who was taken to hospital for mandatory testing was not injured, nor were any of those who were on the bus at the time. Throughout the morning, we've been seeing friends and family laying wreaths, lighting candles, really doing everything they can to reckon with this double tragedy. In fact, this morning we've also been hearing from the Mayor of Fairfield City Council, Frank Carbone. He said that there has been a spate of incidents recently on the T-Way, which is of course dedicated exclusively to buses and emergency vehicles. He says he was calling on the state government for tougher restrictions. Let's take a quick listen to what he had to say earlier.
It's been devastating for us to have lost a 14 and a 15-year-old in this manner, but also a lot of other emotions. We're pretty upset, and the fact that no action's been taken. We've been pushing this issue for quite a few months now with the government. We've been warning them. We had an accident only here 2 weeks ago where pedestrians were hurt with some unauthorised bikes, and unfortunately no action's been taken. And whilst we appreciate that the government's trying to do the best to put regulation in, what we have found is the government's not actually enforcing the laws.
There's Frank Carbone, the Mayor of Fairfield City Council, making clear that He wants the government to do more, certainly to restrict access to the T-way by those unauthorised bikes. Now, we have seen throughout the morning detectives from the New South Wales Police Crash Investigation Unit. They've been making their way up and down the street, so these investigations are still very much underway.
Max Tillman reporting from Sydney. Thank you. Public school teachers in Victoria are walking off the job for the first time in more than a decade because of a wages dispute with the state government. Steph Ferrier joins us now from Melbourne. Steph, why are teachers so upset?
Good morning, Gemma. Well, put simply, they say that they are simply at breaking point, and that's because they say they have excessive workloads and not the same pay as their interstate colleagues. Now, they have rejected an offer from the state government, which was 17% over 4 years. They're actually demanding 35% over the same time period, and they say that is because they are nowhere near, for example, their New South Wales counterparts. A starting or graduate teacher here earns just under $79,000, and that is about 13% less than what they are getting over in New South Wales. When you get up to the experienced teacher level, that gap widens to about 16%, and a starting principal is 18% lower on pay than their New South Wales counterparts. So they are saying that they want to see better pay parity as an absolute minimum, but also they're very concerned about the level of funding here for public schools. Now, this is one of 500 public schools here behind me that is being affected by this 24-hour stoppage. And we spoke earlier on News Breakfast with the Victorian branch president of the Australian Education Union, Justin Mullally. He says that if the teachers' demands aren't heard by the state government, then there is the possibility of this industrial action actually being escalated with further rolling stoppages as well as work bans and limitations. But this is what he had to say about the mood amongst the workers.
Teachers, education support staff and principals are deeply frustrated. They don't feel supported and they're underpaid and undervalued. We're deeply sympathetic about the impact it has on children, on families, and we would actually prefer to be at work today. We want to be in front of classrooms, we want to be supporting children's learning, but the government haven't done enough.
So that's Justin Mullally, who is the Victorian branch president of the Australian Education Union, speaking on News Breakfast earlier. And he was asked whether or not, for example, the state government should be really looking at 35%, given that we're in such a tight budget situation and the state has so many debts. Now, he said that teachers should be able to ask for what they think that they are worth because nobody else is going to do it. And he says that it's also important to note that the state government has not funded public schools to the same level that interstate counterparts have when it comes to education. So he says that all adds to a very stressful environment for the teachers here. Now, today what they're going to be doing is all meeting at Trades Hall. There's an estimated up to 30,000 teachers, principals and education support staff that are going to be meeting there. And from then they are going to actually march to State Parliament to voice their anger at the Victorian government's offer.
Steph Ferrier reporting there. Thank you. Overseas, and at least 70 people have been injured after a Colombian military plane crashed shortly after takeoff. Vision posted to social media by the country's president shows the aircraft struggling to gain altitude before descending out of frame. The incident occurred in the southwest of the country, near the border with Peru. 125 people were on board, most of them soldiers. The commander of the Air Force says it's too early to know what caused the crash.
We have dispatched an investigation team to identify the causes of this accident. We don't have more details, but we know that as soon as the aircraft took off, it presented a problem that made it crash a couple of kilometres away from the airport.
On a post to social media, Colombian President Gustavo Petro said, "I hope we have no deaths in this horrific accident. That should never have happened." The leader continued posting about the crash to promote what he called his long-time campaign to modernise planes and other equipment used by his country's military. He said those efforts have been blocked by bureaucratic difficulties. 2 pilots have been killed in a plane crash at New York's LaGuardia Airport. 72 passengers were on board the Air Canada Express jet when it collided with a fire truck on the tarmac. In the moments before the crash, an air traffic controller could be heard on radio transmission giving clearance to the fire truck to cross part of the tarmac and then trying to stop it.
Truck 1 and Company, LaGuardia Tower, requesting to cross 4 at Delta. Truck 1 and Company, cross 4 at Delta. Truck 1 and Company, 4 at Delta. Frontier 4195, just stop there, please. Stop. Truck 1, stop. Stop, Truck 1, stop. Stop, Truck 1, stop.
Dozens of people were injured and rescuers reportedly found a flight attendant alive, still strapped to her seat on the tarmac after it had fallen through the floor of the damaged plane. New York Mayor Zoran Mamdani commended first responders in what was a chaotic scene.
I'm grateful for the work of dedicated first responders who arrived on the scene within minutes, treated injuries and handled a chaotic scene with incredible professionalism and poise. I also want to commend those who were thrust into a frightening accident and reacted not only with composure, but by extending a hand to the person next to them. Passengers who opened the emergency door and helped one another off the plane. People who kept one another calm.
US transport officials are investigating the crash and the airport has since reopened. A group which says it's aligned with Iran has claimed responsibility for an arson attack in the UK, targeting ambulances operated by a Jewish charity. The attack has not been declared a terrorist incident, but counter-terror police are leading the investigation. Europe Bureau Chief Mazoe Ford filed this report from the crime scene in North London.
London's Metropolitan Police have described this arson attack as an anti-Semitic hate crime. All day, people from London's Jewish community have been coming here to Golders Green across the road from the crime scene to express their support for the Hatzalah ambulance service that was targeted and to be here for each other. A lot of Jewish people live in this neighbourhood. They were woken by the explosion in the middle of the night. Many ran down here to see the flames. This is what some of them told me.
They've stooped to a new low. I mean, these are ambulances saving lives, and they've come and they've, tried to destroy that. But we're just here, we're defiant, and we're going to be saving more lives and just passing on peace and love.
It's not come as a surprise, but it's disgusting and terrifying that this can happen.
Obviously, we are shocked about what happened. We're an ambulance service, and we save life. And that's what we do.
What is more concerning is what's going to happen next. Have they targeted the ambulances in order to prevent emergency response to the next attack?
Online, a group aligned with Iran has claimed responsibility for this attack. Police say they're looking into those claims seriously and will investigate them thoroughly. Forensics officers have spent the day here at the crime scene gathering evidence. They're also looking at CCTV from right around this area, as well as cameras on the street which show 3 men in hoods approach the ambulances and appear to set them on fire before running away. The UK government has strongly condemned this attack and said it will fund the cost of replacement ambulances for the 4 that was set on fire.
It's time to check in on the weather. Nate Byrne joins us. And Nate, it is good to see you safe home from far north Queensland because, it's been a week since it first formed, but we are still talking about Narelle. Where is the system now?
Gemma, it is good to be home, but I'm keeping a very, very close eye on this system because it is still bringing absolutely wild weather now to northern parts of Western Australia. It's an ex-tropical cyclone now, so a tropical low, but it's likely that we'll see it popping back out over ocean soon where it's going to encounter some very warm waters and we'll be ready for some pretty rapid intensification. At the moment, we're looking at cyclone warnings along a pretty remote stretch of the coast, but a watch further south as well. That's for gale force winds developing 24 to 48 hours from now. And that includes those pretty major centres of Karratha and Port Hedland. It is going to be a pretty wild one for some parts of the northwest of the country over the next couple of days as this system really starts to gather speed once again. So it will have been Queensland, the Territory and now Western Australia all dealing with Narelle as a cyclone. For now, because it's a tropical low, it's lost a lot of that sort of classic cyclone shape, but you can still see the remnants of what it was. And now, once it starts to reform, it is going to pretty rapidly rapidly pick up pace. For now, it's really the biggest story we've got going. We do have some troughs causing some wet weather for the east and some onshore winds causing showers there too. But the main focus, particularly with storms, will be heavy falls for WA, though we are still watching the rest of the Territory and northern Queensland too, because there's more rainfall potential on the way today. Major flooding continues at Daly River, Narelle. Just before Narelle arrived, it looked like those major floods might duck just below the major level, but it's lifted once again. Not a huge increase, but there's still a heck of a lot of water in the system. Some moderate flooding going on at Katherine now at the Nipmuc Centre, and a lot more water upstream from there as well. So, yeah, we are going to be feeling the effects of Narelle, where it's already gone, for quite some time.
And how much longer will Narelle be with us?
At least until the weekend in one form or another, I reckon. This time tomorrow, we'll definitely be talking about it as a cyclone once again. But then another 24 hours, we could be talking about it as a severe, maybe Category 4 system. Now, it looks likely that it's going to swing around towards the southeast eventually and clip southwestern parts of the country. But after that, we should be done with it certainly as a cyclone, definitely, but we're likely to still see some big falls out of this for southwestern parts of WA, maybe 100 millimetres for some. For some areas, like over the wheat belt, that's going to be relatively good news, as long as it's not the biggest of the falls. But yeah, Narelle still not done with us yet. And guess what, Gemma? Just as it does go away, I've got another low that I'm now watching to the north of the Territory. Just a low chance we could be talking about a cyclone this time next week, but nevertheless, the season very much continues.
Yeah, it sure does. Can you take us around the states, Nate?
Sure, let's do it. Queensland, wet and stormy right up top. That's going to continue, particularly for the very top of the peninsula. We've also got some wet weather for the east. South of about Cooktown, storm potential south of Bundaberg. Otherwise, things are looking pretty settled. Brisbane, do expect a couple of showers. You're getting to 29 degrees today. And that wet weather continues down into the north coast of New South Wales, maybe with a storm there too. And then we've got some shower activity for the rest of the east, much more isolated, and maybe some stormy weather in the very far south. For Sydney, that means a possible shower today, 27 your top. Canberra's getting to 27 as well, but it should stay dry there. In Victoria, we've got wet weather developing on and south of the Divide with some storms in the mix. Most of the action here will be over in the east, but Melbourne's looking at some showers, getting to 29 degrees. And Tassie is wet across the board. It'll tend to rain in the west. A couple of storms around as well for parts of the north and the east. 18 if you're in Hobart, expect showers. Over in South Australia, we're back to mostly clear skies, except for some wet and stormy potential in the southeast of the state. 31 on the way for Adelaide. Over in WA, we've got a little bit of storm action from the southeast of the Gascoyne down through the interior of WA. Perth staying fine though, getting to 30 there. But then up north, it's all about Narelle and how it's going to be affecting the northwest of WA. And we'll still see plenty of storm activity through the north of the Territory with that flooding continuing. For Darwin, it's just showers today. Gemma, it's getting to 31.
Thanks, Nate. This is ABC News. I'm Gemma Veness, and these are the top stories we're following this morning. Donald Trump says the US has had productive talks with Iran on ending the war and will postpone strikes on its energy facilities for 5 days. But Tehran has rejected the president's claims and says no negotiations have taken place, labelling it fake news to manipulate financial and oil markets. President Trump had given Iran a 48-hour deadline to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, claiming he would obliterate Iranian power plants. Australia and the European Union are set to sign off on a new trade deal after almost a decade of negotiations. EU President Ursula von der Leyen and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese are expected to greenlight the deal in Canberra today. The pact will slash tariffs on countless goods and improve market access for Australian farmers. The two leaders are also expected to sign a new security partnership. 2 boys aged 14 and 15 have been killed after crashing their motorbike into a bus in Sydney's west. The teens were riding on a section of road reserved for buses and emergency vehicles at Bosley Park just after 7 o'clock last night. They collided with the side of the bus before becoming wedged underneath it and died at the scene. Around 30,000 public school teachers in Victoria are walking off the job for the first time in 13 years today over wages and conditions. They plan to stop work for 24 hours and march on state parliament. The union has rejected a 17% increase over 4 years, and they're calling for a 35% increase. Teachers in northwest Tasmania are also going on strike. Let's get more now on the situation in the Middle East. Jennifer Kavanagh is a senior fellow and director of military analysis at Washington-based think tank Defence Priorities. She says military or diplomatic options may not be the solution to opening the Strait of Hormuz, and that Donald Trump extending this deadline was predictable.
It is what I expected. I didn't really think the threat was that credible. The consequences are just too high. It was clear that if the United States struck civilian infrastructure in Iran, Iran would retaliate by hitting water and energy targets across the Gulf. This would not only harm U.S. Gulf state partners in major ways, but would have significant implications for oil prices now and oil prices in the future. And Trump has shown that he's very sensitive to these economic consequences. So it didn't surprise me at all that just before the markets opened in the United States, he backed off this threat. And it's interesting that the time he extended it to is just about the time markets will close in the United States on Friday. So I guess I don't see it as being off the table, but at least it's off the table for the period in which the economic consequences would be most severe and observable.
And what do we know of the talks that are taking place? Because there seem to be conflicting accounts there.
We don't know that much. I think it's clear that the president has overstated what has occurred and what has been accomplished in the diplomatic space. But I also think that there's some evidence that the United States is at least looking for diplomatic options through mediators and pursuing a number of different routes. I mean, I think there is a recognition among many within the Trump administration that military solutions here are both undesirable, very high cost and very high risk, and will take some time before they can work. And already the costs and duration of this war has been longer than they anticipated. So there is an interest in diplomatic solutions. That said, it's not clear that the Trump administration has backed off some of its maximalist terms. And Iran has really no interest or reason to trust the United States at this point, given that the Trump administration has bombed Iran twice in the midst of negotiations. So I think it will be a long road to diplomacy, even if we do see some signs that the administration is pursuing off-ramps.
With the US Marines being deployed around the Persian Gulf, what could they be used for?
Well, I think there's two main scenarios that we're looking at here, neither of which is a good idea, neither of which will work in my view. One is to have them try to seize Karg Island, which is important for Iran's oil export. That would be very difficult. They'll have to get through the Strait of Hormuz up to Karg Island and then have to seize it through some sort of amphibious operation. This will require significant degradation still of Iran's missile and drone capabilities, as well as their ability to lay mines and use underwater drones and submersibles. So it's still some ways off. And even once they seize that island, they'll be very vulnerable to artillery fire, drone threats. It's not clear that the economic pain that Iran would suffer from this would be all that significant or enough to really force Iran to stop. The other alternative is to have the Marines try to seize territory along the coast there, along the Strait of Hormuz. And the idea would be to have these ground forces able to suppress Iran's ability to use drones and missiles and other threats to interfere with commercial traffic. However, again, this is a very difficult military operation, will likely have really high U.S. casualties. And even if U.S. forces are able to land, it's not clear they'll be survivable or that they'll be able to do anything about mines or these underwater fast attack submersibles that Iran has been able to use already. So I guess I see these as very high risk, very low reward options. However, they do seem to be in play as we watch Marines move towards the region.
With those in play, you have said that the better move here in terms of opening the Strait of Hormuz and getting global energy supplies back to where they should be is for Donald Trump to walk away. Can you explain that to us?
Well, I just don't see a military option for forcibly opening the Strait of Hormuz. I think these are too high cost and they probably won't work. I think diplomatic options would be much better, but I don't see a lot of optimism there either, at least in the near term, because I don't see why Iran would, number one, give up its leverage at this point, and number two, why it would trust the United States as a negotiating partner. If the United States were to walk away, however, a unilateral ceasefire that included cessation of attacks by Israel, then the pressure to open the strait would shift away from the United States. You would see pressure, I think, from countries like China and India and other partners of Iran that are looking to have stable oil prices. Now, these countries are getting some oil. Iran is letting their tankers pass through the strait, but they would much prefer to have low and stable oil prices to the current situation. And it will become increasingly untenable, in my view, for Iran to keep the strait closed and to keep attacking Gulf state partners when the U.S. has unilaterally stopped fighting. Now, it won't be immediate. It will take some time. But to me, this is still the fastest and lowest cost way for to restore traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. And the Trump administration could still spin this domestically as a victory if they need to, claiming success in degrading Iran's military capabilities or pushing the regime further from a nuclear weapon, which they said was their goal in the first place.
Jennifer Canova, Senior Fellow and Director of Military Analysis at Defence Priorities, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much.
And as you were just seeing those live pictures on your screen while that interview was playing out there, that was live pictures coming out of Canberra of the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who is visiting there. And these are the live pictures we're bringing you at the moment, as Australia and the European Union look set to finally sign off on this free trade pact today. Because when I say finally, this comes after almost a decade of negotiations. Now, the European Commission President, I should say, is in Canberra. We'll meet with our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, where they are expected to greenlight this deal. They will also sign a new security partnership that's expected that could bolster defence industry cooperation between Europe and Australia. So we don't know the final details of this trade deal. They're not yet public, but a European government sources told the ABC that both sides have made compromises here to get this agreement over the line. And the Prime Minister spoke yesterday in question time, saying that the deal would give Australian farmers and growers and exporters better access to a market of 450 million consumers. OK, so there's the live pictures there that we have brought you. And now we will bring in Tom Crowley now to speak to this. Tom, what do we know about what's likely to be in this deal?
Is one of the main focuses of this. It's obviously, as has been mentioned there, it's been a tortuous process over really very, very many years. 2018 it was when formal negotiations began, but all the way back in 2010 when this idea was first conceived. Our main priority has been to get access to beef, lamb and other products to the really quite massive European market. Collectively, the EU is a similar size of market to China. And when you consider that both China and the US have not always proved the most reliable destinations for our exports in the last couple of years, the EU is a particularly important market. But from the European perspective, it's always been about nomenclature. We know that champagne is the famous example. You can't call it champagne unless it comes from the particular region of France. Well, there's a whole bevy of other European products that agricultural exporters over there would like that to apply to. And Prosecco and Feta in particular, the European Union's been saying, well, if you want access to our market, then Australian producers of Feta and Prosecco can't use those names. So it now seems that the government might have agreed to stop using the name Prosecco after a decade. So they're perhaps going to spin that as a victory, given that the EU typically doesn't allow access to its market without that Prosecco name changing. So to get even a 10-year reprieve, as the government might put it, is perhaps a win in that sense. But Matt Canavan, the Nationals leader, has already suggested that questions our sovereignty, that we should be able to call Australian products whatever we like and that we shouldn't give up something like that unless we're going to get full and unrestricted access of our beef and lamb to the European market. So we'll have to see the fine print of this. Of course, we still don't have the final confirmation that a deal has been done, but we do now believe it's close. The visit of Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, was always seen as the moment that would signal that this deal finally would be done. So we're expecting, after she addresses the Parliament today, that at some point this deal will be announced. Of course, in a time where global trade is so turbulent, signing a big free trade agreement with a big middle power bloc like this will be a significant step forward towards that sort of partnership between middle powers that Australia, Canada and Europe have been talking so much about. Gemma.
On another matter, Tom, today marks 1,000 days since the publication of the Peter Murphy report into gambling harm. Now, her recommendations, they have drawn support across the Parliament. including from many within the Labor caucus. Is the government under internal pressure to respond to that report?
It has been intermittently, really, since the very beginning. This Peter Murphy inquiry, of course, included people from across the political spectrum, including crossbenchers like Kate Chaney, who continue to prosecute this issue. Its key recommendation was a total ban on gambling ads, full stop, and also scaling back on multis and other types of betting promotions. There are lots of people within the Labor fold who thought it was an excellent piece of work and who have fond memories of their former colleague, Peter Murphy, who have been pushing internally for the government to go further on this. No sign of that from Prime Minister Anthony Albanese or from successive communications ministers in Michelle Rowland and Annika Wells. They, generally speaking, have suggested that the government's existing actions on gambling, which they say are the most that a government has taken since Federation, are sufficient. Not a universal view within the Labor caucus. We don't often hear too much dissent within that room, but when they meet today, perhaps this is one of the issues that might be raised.
Finally, Tom, the government continues to face pressure over its response to the rising cost of fuel. What is the latest on that?
Yes, well, the government yesterday, Chris Bowen in Question Time, gave a partial update on where there are petrol stations across the country that don't have access to diesel or to regular fuel. The stockpile remains at 38 days for regular fuel and 30 for diesel and for jet fuel. And the government's sort of saying that overall that's an adequate level, but trying to put out spot fires, if you like. So the latest thing today is picking up on a recommendation from the Transport Workers Union and the Truckers Association that truckies, who are often contractors and might have difficulty negotiating through these extra prices themselves when they're an individual contractor, that they can apply in an emergency sense to the Fair Work Commission to have their cases heard. We know that some of the larger supermarket chains and some of the larger ride-sharing apps have already announced that they'll either pass on hikes to consumers or wear some of the extra costs of gas themselves rather than passing it directly onto contractors. This is about getting that broader consistency. But as for any bigger sweeping measures like cost of living support or perhaps fuel rationing, the government's saying it's keeping all of its options open but not considering any of those broader measures at this point.
Radio National Breakfast political correspondent Tom Crowley, thank you. The Queensland Government will introduce sweeping new legislation to State Parliament this week to crack down on e-mobility devices. Jordan Bissell reports.
Minors will be banned from riding e-bikes and scooters in Queensland under new legislation to be introduced to State Parliament this week. Doctors warn the growing injury count from the use of e-bikes and e-scooters has led to a paediatric health crisis. Earlier this month, a teenage couple, a 15-year-old girl and her 16-year-old boyfriend, were killed as they collided with a motorcycle in Greenbank, south of Brisbane. A recent spate of deaths and serious injuries has prompted Queensland to propose the country's strictest controls on e-devices. Other states are watching closely to see whether the move brings down the injury toll. Anyone who wants to use an e-scooter or bike in Queensland will need to hold a learner licence under the proposed laws. The state government is accepting in principle all 28 recommendations made by a parliamentary inquiry earlier this month. Under 16s will be banned from using e-mobility devices. Parents and guardians can be held responsible for fines incurred by their children, and speed limits will reduce to 10 kilometres an hour on all footpaths. More powerful devices will be classed as motorcycles or mopeds, requiring registration and insurance. Police and authorised transport officers will be given additional powers. It follows similar seize and crush laws introduced in Western Australia.
Meanwhile, in New South Wales, the state government will put forward a bill in Parliament today targeting high-powered e-bikes. The legislation will target a number of throttle-only high-powered e-motorbikes. It says, essentially, if an e-bike is performing like a motorbike, it can be seized and crushed. Police and authorised transport officers will also be given additional enforcement powers.
If there's low-powered, safe e-bikes, like any bike, we want people to be able to jump on them and ride them. But these high-powered e-motorcycles, we have to get off our streets. They are illegal, they are dangerous, and they're causing a problem for people who are moving around the city. If you're pushing a pram, if you're an older citizen walking on the footpath.
The future of Australia's only manganese smelter, Liberty Bell Bay, is in doubt, with administrators hoping to secure enough funds to pay more than 200 employees after its owner entered voluntary administration. Kelsey Reid reports.
Liberty Bell Bay plays a critical role in Australia's steelmaking. The smelter is one of the biggest industrial facilities in Tasmania and employs over 200 people. But in May last year, owner GFG Alliance put the smelter into care and maintenance, and it hasn't started production, despite getting a $20 million loan from the Tasmanian government for a shipment of ore. Earlier this month, the corporate regulator took court action to try and wind up the company after it failed to lodge annual financial statements for 5 years. Liberty Bell Bay has now been placed into voluntary administration by its major lender, with Ernst & Young appointed to run the company. The administrators say their primary objective is to finalise the restructure or sale of the company and its assets. Stakeholders, including unions and local businesses, are hoping the latest development leads to a positive outcome.
Administration offers a pathway forward for a future viable operation continuing at Bell Bay, as opposed to a liquidation process which doesn't.
I think that's a definitive action now, and we can actually look at some steps forward. So there are some buyers that are very interested.
The federal and Tasmanian governments say they are working with administrators and other stakeholders to ensure workers are supported.
Unions are pushing to boost the minimum wage by 5% to account for rising household costs as part of the Fair Work Commission's annual wage review negotiations. The Secretary of the Australian Council of Trade Unions, Sally McManus, says a pay increase for minimum wage workers will not affect the economy's inflation rate.
So let's put this argument to bed once and for all. The impact of the minimum wage increases is only 0.6% of the overall national wage bill. Now, whilst it's 23% of people, remember, they're low paid, a lot of casual, a lot of part-time people there. So the impact overall is so tiny. So even if those workers had a really large pay increase, it's not going to affect the rest of inflation for everyone. Of course, other workers will be looking for pay rises as well, but there's not a clear nexus between the two. And these particular workers, as I said before, they're not bargaining, they've got no other way to get ahead. This is the one chance they have to get ahead every single year, and they're behind. And we will not put up with seeing these workers go backwards like they did during the last inflation spike. There's no group of workers that are hurting more from cost of living increases than low-paid workers, and we're talking about 23% of the workforce that depend on the minimum wage being increased. So they're more likely to be renters. Obviously, they've got nowhere to go when things go up in terms of petrol, or, of course, if they end up going up in supermarkets. So it's absolutely essential that these workers get ahead. Actually, they copped it the most during the inflation spike of 2022, and they're still behind where they were in 2021. So we must have a pay rise that gets them in front of inflation at this time.
It's time for Sport now with Charles Bryce.
Thanks, Gemma. It's injuries galore across both the AFL and the NRL. Port Adelaide confirming that skipper Connor Rozee will spend an extended period of time on the sideline with a hamstring injury. Scans yesterday showed Rozee suffered a high-grade hamstring tendon rupture, which will likely need surgery. Injuries have also struck Richmond as well, with Tigers ruckman Toby Nankervis missing up to 8 weeks with a hamstring injury. Tom Lynch will also be out for at least 5 weeks. In the NRL, West Tigers co-captain Jerome Luai will miss a month with a knee injury. The club confirmed the 29-year-old suffered a medial ligament injury in his side's 20-16 loss to South Sydney. Elsewhere, St George Illawarra forward Ryan Couchman will face the NRL judiciary tonight over a hip drop tackle that left Parramatta's Jermaine Hopgood with a season-ending knee injury. In cricket, Cricket Australia has revealed New Zealand politely declined an invitation to join the Big Bash League. The domestic competition is looking to expand before potentially being sold to private owners. The Kiwis are looking to launch their own privately owned T20 league as early as January next year. And staying with cricket, the defending Sheffield Shield year, South Australia broke its near 20-year Shield drought with a win over Queensland. This year's final begins at Junction Oval on Thursday.
Thanks, Charles. Now it's time to check in on the weather with Nate Byrne. What's happening, Nate?
I'm keeping an eye on the northwest of the country, Gemma. Morning. WA is now the latest of the north to be dealing with what is now ex-tropical cyclone Narelle. Now, it's heading towards the southwest at the moment as a tropical low, bringing some big falls. We've seen more than 160 millimetres for some parts of northern WA, including places like Truscott. And now, we've got warnings on for gale force winds over the next 24 hours for parts of that northern Kimberley coast, but it doesn't include the major centres of Broome or Derby. A little bit further down the coast, a cyclone watch for gale force winds potentially developing there. That includes places like Karratha and Port Hedland. Now, that's there because we're likely to see this system rapidly re-intensifying. In fact, latest from the Bureau is that it'll probably happen today. Overnight tonight, we're likely to be talking about tropical cyclone Narelle once again. Now, it'll continue its track southwestwards along that northwestern parts of the WA coast in the coming days. For the rest of the country, we've got some troughs, a bit of a mess in the southeast, some onshore winds causing some showers and storms here and there, but it's still mostly about what's going on across northern Australia, particularly the northwest. Now, we're expecting to see more potential for flash flooding today. Riverine rises as well continue in parts of the Territory in particular, and there is more wet and stormy weather on the way today around places like Daly and Katherine. Now, Narelle, what's going to happen next is about 24 hours from after it forms, it's likely to have intensified back to severe cyclone strength, so a Category 3, probably then towards a Category 4, before it curves down and takes aim for WA's west coast. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty about exactly where and when it's going to make that crossing. We'll have to wait until we're a bit closer, but we do know it's going to carry in a heck of a lot of that tropical moisture with it, so we've got a big drop on the way for the southwest of the country through the outlook. Let's get around the states. We'll start in Queensland for today, and you've got more wet and stormy weather across the north, particularly the top of Cape York Peninsula. Showers for the east as well, south of Cooktown, but mostly it'll be south of Bundaberg with some storms in the mix. Showers for Brisbane today, you're getting to 29 degrees, just a couple. That wet and stormy weather continues into the north coast of New South Wales. We've also got some isolated falls for the rest of the east and some stormy weather pushing into the far south later. Everyone else is staying fine. Possible shower in Sydney, 27 there, 27 for Canberra as well, but you'll be dry. In Victoria, we've got wet and maybe stormy weather. It's moving through the south of the state, south of the divide, most of the action over in the east. It's getting to 29 in Melbourne. You've got some showers. Meanwhile, in Tassie, it's wet across the board, tending to rain in the west of the state. We could pick up a couple of storms, a little bit of lightning for parts of the north and the east later today as well. It'll be showers for Hobart, and you're a lot chillier, only 18 degrees. In South Australia, we're back to mostly clear skies and warmth too. Just the southeast dealing with some showers, maybe the odd storm as well. It's getting to 31 with clear skies in Adelaide. Over in WA, now we'll split the two into it's north and south as always, right? But the south does have some storm action from the southeast of the Gascoyne through the interior all the way down to western parts of the Eucla, parts of the southwest land division as well. Perth's avoiding all of that, getting to 30 degrees. And then up north, as the tropical low moves offshore, and we'll start to see that intensification, prepare for gale force winds to develop along the northwest coast. Some storm action too, potentially, particularly up in the Kimberley, but we could be feeling it later on in the day for the Pilbara as well. And then leaning back into the Territory, it's the northern half, still dealing with wet and stormy weather. Keep an eye out if you're in those flooded regions. For Darwin, it's more wet weather today, Gemma, getting to 31.
Thanks, Nate. Now there's more on the ABC News app and on ABC iView. I'm Gemma Veness. Coming up on the ABC News channel, we will be crossing to Canberra as Australia and the European Union prepare to sign this long-awaited free trade pact. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is preparing to address federal parliament today also. These are live pictures we are bringing you from Canberra. As we can see, the Prime Minister is there. They are expected to sign this new security partnership as well as an agreement on research and development. So these are the live pictures we are bringing you from Canberra with this trade deal and other deals expected to be signed today between Australia and the European Union. More to come in just a moment.